Have you ever noticed how a small child learns to walk? They fall again and again and again. But here's the fascinating part. They never label those falls as failures. They don't sit there thinking, well, I guess walking isn't for me. They get up, wobble, and try again. That pure, untainted persistence holds the secret to one of life's most powerful truths. What we call failure is nothing but a stepping stone to success. The room falls silent when someone mentions failure, doesn't it? We've been conditioned to see failure as something shameful, something to hide away in the darkest corners of our memory. But I'm here to tell you that this view of failure isn't just wrong, it's robbing you of your greatest potential. The last time you failed at something important to you, remember that gut-wrenching feeling? That voice in your head that whispered, maybe you're just not good enough? Hold on to that feeling for a moment, because by the time we finish here today, you're going to see that very same failure in a completely different light. You see, failure isn't your enemy. Fear of failure is. When we let that fear control us, we create invisible prisons around ourselves. We stop taking risks. We settle for good enough. We watch our dreams slowly fade away, all because we're afraid to fail. But here's what nobody tells you about failure. It's the world's most effective teacher. Think about it. When everything goes perfectly, what do you learn? Usually, very little. But when you fail, that's when the real education begins. Let me share something with you. In a small workshop, there was a craftsman who made beautiful wooden furniture. One day, a young apprentice came to learn from him. The apprentice was eager but terrified of making mistakes. Every time he would pick up a tool, his hands would shake. The craftsman noticed this and did something unexpected. He deliberately made a mistake in front of the apprentice. He took a perfectly good piece of wood and made a wrong cut. The apprentice was shocked. "Why did you do that?" he asked. The craftsman smiled and said, "Now watch what happens next." He then proceeded to transform that mistake into a unique design feature that made the piece even more beautiful than the original plan. "You see," the craftsman explained, "in all my years of working with wood, I've learned more from my mistakes than from my successes. Each mistake showed me a new possibility I hadn't considered before." This simple story captures a profound truth about failure. It's not the end of the road, it's the beginning of a new path. Every single failure carries within it the seeds of an equivalent or greater success, if only we have the wisdom to plant them. But let's get practical. How do we actually transform our failures into wins? It starts with understanding that failure is not a personal indictment, it's information. When you fail at something, you've just discovered one way that doesn't work. That's valuable data. Consider the scientists who work in research laboratories. When an experiment fails, do they throw up their hands and quit? No. They meticulously document what didn't work and why. They understand that each failed experiment narrows down the path to success. They don't see failures, they see elimination of possibilities. This brings us to the first crucial step in transforming failure into success. You must change your relationship with failure. Stop seeing it as your enemy and start seeing it as your mentor. Every failure is trying to teach you something. The question is, are you willing to be a student? Let me ask you something. What if you knew you couldn't fail? What would you attempt? What dreams would you chase? What risks would you take? Hold that thought, because here's the truth. You actually can't fail. Not really, not unless you quit. Any significant achievement in human history, behind every breakthrough, every innovation, every success story, there's a long trail of failures. But we don't remember those failures, do we? We remember the triumph that came after them. Take the story of a small neighborhood restaurant owner. For years, his business barely stayed afloat. He tried everything. Different menus, different decorations, different marketing approaches. Nothing seemed to work. Other restaurant owners in the area saw him as a failure, quietly pitying his persistence. But this restaurant owner did something different with each setback. Instead of seeing them as failures, he saw them as market research. When a new menu item didn't sell, he didn't just remove it. He asked customers why they didn't order it. When a marketing campaign fell flat, he studied why it didn't resonate. Each failure became a piece of a puzzle he was slowly putting together. And then one day, everything clicked. He realized that what his neighborhood really needed wasn't another traditional restaurant. It was a place where families could come together, where children could learn to cook simple dishes while their parents enjoyed their meal. He transformed his restaurant into a unique dining experience where families could cook together under gentle guidance. The same community that had witnessed his failures now celebrated his innovation. His restaurant became not just successful, but a beloved community institution. This story teaches us something vital about failure. It's often not about our actions being wrong, but about our perspective being incomplete. Each failure fills in another piece of the picture, if we're willing to look closely enough. But here's where most people go wrong. They try to avoid failure at all costs. They play it safe, stick to what they know, and then wonder why their lives feel stuck in neutral. They fail to understand that growth and comfort cannot coexist. You have to choose one or the other. What if instead of trying to avoid failure, we actively embraced it? What if we saw it as a necessary part of any worthwhile journey? Think about it. Has anything truly worthwhile in your life come easily without any setbacks or difficulties? The truth is, failure is not the opposite of success. It's a component of success. Just as an athlete needs resistance to build muscle, we need failure to build resilience, wisdom, and ultimately, success. Let me share another perspective that might change how you view failure forever. Imagine you're teaching a young child to ride a bicycle. When they fall, and they will fall, do you tell them they're a failure? Do you suggest they give up? Of course not. You encourage them to get back up, dust themselves off, and try again. So why do we treat ourselves so differently? Why do we expect perfection from ourselves when we would never demand it from others? This double standard is holding us back from our true potential. Here's a powerful truth. The most successful people in any field aren't those who never fail. They're those who fail forward. They use each failure as a launching pad for their next attempt. They understand that failure is not a period at the end of a sentence, it's a comma in a continuing story. But transforming failure into success requires more than just a positive attitude. It requires a systematic approach. Think of yourself as a scientist in the laboratory of your own life. Each failure is not a dead end, it's data. The question isn't, why did I fail? But rather, what can this failure teach me? When you study your failures with genuine curiosity rather than shame, patterns begin to emerge. You start to see that your failures aren't random. They're trying to tell you something. They're pointing you toward areas that need your attention, skills that need development, or assumptions that need questioning. Consider the story of a small bakery in a quiet town. The owner had dreamed of running her own business since childhood. But 6 months in, she was facing bankruptcy. Her beautiful pastries weren't selling, and she was ready to give up. But instead of closing shop, she did something remarkable. She started keeping a failure journal. In this journal, she documented everything that wasn't working. She noticed that while customers praised her pastry's appearance, they rarely came back for more. This observation led her to a crucial realization. She had been so focused on making her pastries look perfect that she had neglected their taste. She had been creating pastries for the eye, not the palate. This insight changed everything. She spent the next month perfecting her recipes, focusing on flavor rather than appearance. She invited her most honest critics, the neighborhood children, to taste test her creations. Each criticism, each wrinkled nose, each uneaten pastry became valuable feedback. Today, her bakery is the heart of the community. Her pastries might not win any beauty contests, but people line up every morning to buy them. What appeared to be a failure was actually the foundation of her success, but only because she was willing to learn from it. This brings us to a crucial understanding about failure. It's not just about what went wrong, it's about what that experience is trying to teach you. Every failure carries within it a lesson, but these lessons don't announce themselves with trumpets and fanfare. You have to dig for them. Let me ask you something. What was your most recent failure? Now, what if I told you that this failure might be exactly what you need to achieve your biggest success? You might be thinking, that's impossible. This failure has set me back. It's cost me time, money, or opportunities. But here's what you need to understand. Failure only sets you back if you let it. A master chess player. When they lose a game, do they see it as a failure? No. They study that game move by move, understanding where they went wrong, what they missed, what they could have done differently. They know that each lost game makes them a stronger player, but only if they're willing to learn from it. This brings us to the second key principle in transforming failure into success. You must develop a systematic approach to learning from your failures. This means examining them objectively, without emotional attachment. It means asking yourself tough questions. What exactly went wrong? Not just the obvious surface failure, but the root cause. What assumptions did I make that proved incorrect? What signals did I miss? What could I have done differently? Most importantly, what can I learn from this that will make me better? But here's where it gets interesting. Sometimes what appears to be your biggest failure can actually be redirecting you toward your true path. Let me share a story that illustrates this perfectly. There was a teacher who had spent 15 years in the classroom. She poured her heart into her work, but consistently received poor evaluations from her supervisors. No matter how hard she tried, she couldn't seem to fit into the traditional teaching model. By all conventional measures, she was failing at her chosen profession. But she noticed something interesting. While her classroom methods didn't align with standard practices, her struggling students often showed remarkable improvement. She had an unconventional way of explaining complex concepts using stories and real-world examples that didn't fit the approved curriculum, but somehow made difficult subjects click for students who had been labeled difficult or slow. What seemed like failure in one context was actually pointing her toward her true calling. She eventually left the traditional classroom and started a learning center for students with alternative learning styles. What had appeared to be her biggest professional failure became the foundation for her greatest success, but only because she was willing to look beyond the apparent failure to see the opportunity it was revealing. This leads us to another crucial truth about failure. Sometimes what we perceive as failure is actually life's way of redirecting us toward a better path. But we can only see this if we're willing to look at our failures with open eyes and an open mind. Think about your own life for a moment. How many times has an apparent failure led you to something better? How many times has a closed door forced you to find another path that turned out to be more rewarding than your original plan? The problem is we often become so attached to our original vision of success that we fail to see the better opportunities our failures are revealing. We're like travelers so focused on reaching a particular destination that we miss the beautiful vistas our detours reveal. But transforming failure into success requires more than just philosophical understanding. It requires practical action. You need a concrete strategy for turning your failures into stepping stones toward success. First, you must develop what I call a failure protocol, a systematic way of responding to failure that prevents emotional reactions from clouding your judgment. When failure occurs, your first response shouldn't be despair or self-criticism. It should be curiosity. What happened? Why did it happen? What can I learn from this? Think of failure as feedback from life. It's not telling you to give up. It's telling you to adjust your approach. Every failure is like a signpost saying, "Not this way." But too often we stop at the signpost instead of looking for the alternate route it's pointing us toward. Remember the child learning to walk? Each fall teaches them something about balance, about how their body works, about the relationship between movement and stability. They don't need anyone to tell them to learn from their falls. They do it instinctively. Somewhere along the way, we lose this natural ability to learn from failure. We need to reclaim it. But here's something crucial to understand. Not all failures are created equal. Some failures are simply the result of poor preparation or execution. These are the easiest to fix. Other failures come from flawed assumptions or misconceptions about what's possible or necessary. These require deeper examination and often lead to the most profound learning opportunities. The key is to approach each failure with a detective's mindset. You're not looking for someone to blame. You're looking for clues that will help you do better next time. Every failure leaves a trail of evidence if you know how to look for it. But perhaps the most important aspect of transforming failure into success is understanding that failure is not a moment in time. It's a judgment we make about a moment in time. And like all judgments, it can be revised as we gain new perspective and understanding. Let's talk about something that happens in every garden. When a gardener prunes a plant, they're essentially creating a small wound. To the plant, this might seem like damage, a failure of growth. But the gardener knows that this temporary setback will lead to fuller, healthier growth. Nature understands something that we often forget. Sometimes what looks like failure is actually preparation for greater success. Every single person in this room has failed at something. Some of these failures might still sting when you think about them. But here's what's fascinating. The pain of failure isn't in the failure itself, it's in the meaning we attach to it. When a door closes in your face, you have two options. You can stand there staring at the closed door, wondering why it closed and feeling sorry for yourself. Or you can look around and notice that the hallway you're standing in has other doors you never noticed before. The failure hasn't changed, but your response to it makes all the difference. Let me share with you a story about a small manufacturing company. They had invested heavily in developing a new product line. The development took 2 years and consumed most of their resources. When they finally launched, the market response was devastating, complete indifference. By any conventional measure, this was a colossal failure. The company had two choices. They could close their doors and become another business failure statistic, or they could look deeper into their failure for hidden opportunities. They chose the latter. As they analyzed their failure, they discovered something interesting. While developing their failed product, they had created several innovative manufacturing processes. These processes, which they had seen as merely steps toward their end product, were actually more valuable than the product itself. Today, that company doesn't manufacture products at all. They license their manufacturing processes to other companies and are more successful than they ever would have been with their original plan. Their biggest failure became their biggest success, but only because they were willing to look past the obvious failure to see the hidden opportunity. This brings us to a fundamental truth about failure. It often comes disguised as valuable market research. When you fail, you've learned something important about what doesn't work. This information is invaluable, but only if you're willing to use it. The times you've failed in your own life. What if those failures weren't random? What if they were actually trying to guide you towards something better? What if every failure was actually life's way of saying, "Not this way, there's a better path for you"? But here's where most people go wrong. They take failure personally. They see it as a judgment of their worth rather than what it really is, feedback about their approach. This is like a scientist taking it personally when an experiment fails. It's not about you, it's about the process. Consider this. When you're driving at night and you take a wrong turn, your GPS doesn't tell you you're a failure as a driver. It simply recalculates and shows you a new route. That's how we need to think about failure, not as a dead end, but as an opportunity to recalculate our route to success. But transforming failure into success requires more than just positive thinking. It requires a complete paradigm shift in how we view failure itself. Here's what I mean. Most people see success and failure as opposites. But they're not opposites at all. They're parts of the same process, like breathing in and breathing out, learning any new skill. When a baby learns to walk, every fall is part of the learning process. The falls aren't failures, they're necessary steps toward success. But somewhere along the way, we lose this understanding. We start seeing failure as something to avoid rather than something to learn from. This brings us to another crucial principle in transforming failure into success. You must learn to fail better. Yes, you heard that right. Not fail less, but fail better. Failing better means failing in ways that teach you more, that move you closer to your goals, that reveal new possibilities you hadn't considered before. Let me give you an example. There was a small publishing house that specialized in educational materials. They had a string of failures trying to compete with larger publishers in the textbook market. Each failure cost them money they couldn't afford to lose. But instead of giving up, they started studying their failures more closely. They noticed something interesting. While their textbooks weren't selling well, teachers often commented that they liked certain innovative features in the books. These features weren't enough to make schools switch from their established textbook providers, but they were definitely on to something. This led them to a crucial insight. They were playing the wrong game. Instead of trying to compete in the crowded textbook market, they should focus on creating supplementary materials that incorporated their innovative approaches. These materials wouldn't replace textbooks, but would complement them. This shift in strategy changed everything. Their failure in the textbook market led them to discover an underserved niche where they could truly excel. Today, they're a leader in their specialized market segment, more successful than they ever could have been as a traditional textbook publisher. This story illustrates another important principle. Sometimes failure is life's way of pushing you toward your true path, but you can only find that path if you're willing to learn from your failures rather than being defeated by them in your own life. How many times has an apparent failure led you to something better? How many times has a closed door forced you to find another path that turned out to be more rewarding than your original plan? But here's something crucial to understand. Transforming failure into success isn't just about changing your attitude. It's about changing your actions. It's about developing specific strategies for extracting value from every failure. First, you need to develop what I call a failure recovery protocol. This is a systematic way of responding to failure that prevents emotional reactions from clouding your judgment. When failure occurs, your first response shouldn't be despair or self-criticism. It should be curiosity. What happened? Why did it happen? What can I learn from this? Second, you need to start seeing failure as feedback rather than an end point. Every failure is giving you information about what doesn't work. This information is invaluable, but only if you're willing to use it. Think of failure as the universe's way of giving you free market research. Third, you need to understand that timing is often as important as ability. Sometimes, what appears to be a failure is simply an idea whose time hasn't yet come. The key is to learn from the failure while maintaining the vision that inspired you in the first place. Here's a powerful truth that most people never understand. Success is not the absence of failure, it's the accumulation of transformed failures. Every significant achievement in human history was built on a foundation of failures that were understood, analyzed, and transformed into stepping stones. Consider this: in nature, nothing is ever wasted. When a leaf falls from a tree, it doesn't represent failure. It decomposes and becomes nutrients for future growth. That's how we need to think about our failures, not as endings, but as raw materials for future success. Let me share a story that illustrates this principle perfectly. In a small coastal town, there was a fisherman who had spent his life perfecting his craft. He knew where to find the best fish, when to cast his nets, how to read the weather. But then something changed. The fish populations began to decline, and his traditional fishing spots no longer yielded enough to make a living. By all conventional measures, he was failing at the only thing he knew how to do. Other fishermen in similar situations either gave up or moved to different waters. But this fisherman did something different. He started studying why the fish were disappearing. His investigation led him to discover that certain local seaweed beds, crucial for fish breeding, were being destroyed by pollution. Instead of accepting defeat, he began experimenting with ways to restore these seaweed beds. He used his knowledge of the ocean currents and marine life to develop a method for replanting and protecting the seaweed. What started as a desperate attempt to save his livelihood transformed into something much bigger. His restoration method not only brought the fish back, but also attracted the attention of marine conservation groups. Today, his technique is used in coastal communities around the world, and he trains other fishermen in marine ecosystem restoration. His apparent failure as a fisherman led him to a success he never could have imagined. But here's the crucial point. This transformation wasn't automatic. It required him to look at his failure with new eyes, to see beyond the immediate problem to the bigger picture. This brings us to another vital principle in transforming failure into success. You must learn to see failure as a catalyst for innovation. When things are working well, we rarely feel the need to innovate. It's when we fail that we're forced to think differently, to explore new possibilities, to challenge our assumptions about what's possible. How many great innovations came from someone trying to solve a problem? How many breakthroughs happened because someone refused to accept failure as final? The key is to see failure not as an end, but as a beginning. The beginning of a new way of thinking, a new approach, a new understanding. But here's where it gets really interesting. Sometimes the biggest failures lead to successes in completely unexpected areas. It's like throwing a boomerang. The path to success often curves in ways we never anticipated. Let me share another perspective that might change how you view failure forever. Imagine you're an archaeologist. When you dig at a site and find nothing, is that a failure? No. It's valuable information. You now know where something isn't, which helps you narrow down where it might be. That's how we need to think about failure. Not as a dead end, but as valuable information that helps us narrow down the path to success. But transforming failure into success requires more than just a new perspective. It requires a new set of skills. You need to become what I call a failure alchemist. Someone who can transform the lead of failure into the gold of success. First, you need to develop your failure analysis skills. This means learning to look at failure objectively, without emotional attachment. What exactly went wrong? What assumptions proved incorrect? What unexpected factors came into play? This isn't about assigning blame, it's about gathering information. Second, you need to develop your pattern recognition skills. One failure might be random, but a series of failures often reveals a pattern. These patterns are incredibly valuable because they show you where you need to focus your attention, what you need to learn, what you need to change. Third, you need to develop your experimentation skills. This means learning to fail faster and cheaper. Instead of putting all your resources into one big attempt, learn to make smaller, controlled failures that give you information without devastating consequences. A master chef developing a new recipe. They don't start by preparing a banquet for 100 people. They start with small batches, testing and adjusting as they go. Each failure provides information that helps them refine their recipe. That's how we should approach any significant goal. through controlled experimentation that allows us to learn from our failures without being destroyed by them. But perhaps the most important skill you need to develop is what I call failure resilience. This isn't just about bouncing back from failure, it's about bouncing forward. It's about using the energy of failure to propel you toward your next attempt. A spring, when you compress it, it stores energy. When you release it, that stored energy propels it forward. That's how we need to think about failure. Each failure, if properly understood and processed, can store energy that propels us toward our next success. Let me ask you something. What if every failure in your life up until now has been preparing you for your greatest success? What if every setback, every disappointment, every apparent dead end has been giving you exactly the experience and wisdom you need for your next breakthrough? This isn't just positive thinking, it's a practical approach to transforming failure into success. Every failure gives you something valuable: experience, insight, understanding, resilience. The question is, are you collecting these valuable resources, or are you leaving them behind in your rush to escape the pain of failure? Consider this. When a martial artist falls, they learn to fall in a way that preserves their energy and positions them for their next move. That's how we need to handle failure. Not just surviving it, but using it to position ourselves for our next success. But here's something crucial to understand. Transforming failure into success isn't just about what you do after you fail. It's about how you approach the possibility of failure in the first place. Most people are so afraid of failure that they never truly commit to success. They hold back, they hedge their bets, they create backup plans that become self-fulfilling prophecies. What if, instead of trying to avoid failure, you committed to failing better? What if you saw each failure not as a step back, but as a step deeper into understanding what it takes to succeed? What if you treated each failure as valuable feedback from life about what needs to change, what needs to grow, what needs to be learned? There's a story about a pottery teacher who divided their class into two groups. The first group was told they would be graded solely on the quality of a single pot they would make during the semester. The second group was told they would be graded on the quantity of pots they produced. 50 pounds of pots would earn an A, 40 pounds a B, and so on. When the semester ended, something fascinating emerged. The highest quality pots were all produced by the group being graded on quantity. While the quality group had spent endless hours theorizing and planning their perfect pot, the quantity group had been learning from each failure, improving with each attempt, discovering what worked and what didn't through direct experience. This simple story reveals a profound truth about success and failure. The path to excellence is paved with countless small failures, each one teaching us something valuable. The students focused on quantity weren't afraid to fail because they knew each failure was bringing them closer to mastery. But here's where it gets really interesting. The fear of failure is often more damaging than failure itself. When we're paralyzed by the fear of failure, we stop taking risks. We stop growing. We stop reaching for what might be possible. We settle for safe mediocrity instead of risking magnificent failure. The greatest risk you've ever taken in your life. Maybe it was starting a business, moving to a new city, telling someone you loved them, or pursuing a dream everyone else thought was impossible. In that moment of risk, failure was a very real possibility. But you took the risk anyway. Why? Because the potential for success outweighed the fear of failure. That's the mindset we need to cultivate. Not fearlessness, but the willingness to act despite our fears. The willingness to see failure not as a final verdict on our abilities, but as feedback on our current approach. Let me share one final story that brings all of these principles together. There was a small town clerk who had spent 30 years maintaining the town's records. When the town decided to modernize and digitize all their records, she felt completely lost. Every attempt to learn the new system resulted in failure. Her colleagues suggested she take early retirement rather than face the humiliation of these constant failures. But instead of giving up, she did something remarkable. She started keeping a failure diary. Every time she made a mistake with the new system, she wrote down exactly what she'd done and what had gone wrong. At first, this diary was just a record of her failures, but slowly it became something else, a manual for learning the new system. Her colleagues noticed that her detailed documentation of her failures was actually helping them understand the system better. Her failure diary became a valuable resource for training new employees. What's more, her deep understanding of how things could go wrong made her exceptionally good at troubleshooting problems in the new system. Today, she's the go-to person for solving complex problems with the digital system. Her willingness to document and learn from her failures transformed her from someone who was nearly forced into early retirement into an indispensable expert. Her biggest failures became the foundation of her biggest success. This brings us to the final and perhaps most important principle in transforming failure into success. You must be willing to fail publicly. Most people try to hide their failures, but this robs them and others of valuable learning opportunities. When you're willing to fail publicly, to share what you've learned from your failures, you transform personal failure into collective wisdom. Every time you fail at something and share what you've learned, you're making it easier for someone else to succeed. Your failures, properly understood and shared, become stepping stones for others. This transforms failure from a personal setback into a contribution to collective progress. But here's the really exciting part. When you truly understand how to transform failure into success, you become unstoppable. Not because you never fail, but because failure loses its power to stop you. Each failure becomes just another step on your path to success. Remember how we started with that child learning to walk. That child doesn't need anyone to tell them to get up after each fall. They don't need motivation or encouragement. They just keep getting up because they haven't learned that falling is something to be afraid of. What if we could reclaim that natural resilience? What if we could unlearn our fear of failure and relearn the art of failing forward? What if we could see each failure not as a judgment on our worth, but as a necessary step toward our goals? The truth is, you're going to fail. That's not pessimism, it's reality. But what if that's not bad news? What if that's actually the best news you could hear? Because if you're going to fail anyway, you might as well fail magnificently. Fail in the pursuit of something worthwhile. Fail while reaching for your dreams. Fail in ways that teach you, shape you, and ultimately transform you. You see, the real tragedy isn't failing. It's failing small, failing while playing it safe, failing while trying to avoid failure. The real tragedy is letting the fear of failure keep you from attempting something magnificent. So, here's my challenge to you. Starting today, change your relationship with failure. Stop seeing it as something to avoid and start seeing it as something to learn from. Stop hiding your failures and start analyzing them. Stop letting failure define you and start letting it refine you. Remember, every master was once a disaster. Every expert was once a beginner. Every success story includes a long list of failures that were transformed into stepping stones. Your failures don't define you. What you do with them does. The choice is yours. You can let your failures break you, or you can let them make you. You can see them as evidence of your limitations, or you can see them as invitations to grow. You can try to avoid failure, or you can learn to fail better. Because here's the ultimate truth. The only real failure is the failure to learn from failure. Everything else is just feedback, just information, just another step on your path to success. Every failure you face carries within it the seeds of an equivalent or greater success, but only if you have the courage to plant those seeds, the patience to nurture them, and the wisdom to recognize the harvest when it comes. Your next failure isn't an ending, it's a beginning. It's not a judgment, it's an opportunity. It's not a stop sign, it's a stepping stone. And if you can understand that, truly understand it, you'll never again have to fear failure. Instead, you'll recognize it for what it really is. The first step toward your next success. The question isn't whether you'll fail, you will. The question is what you'll do with those failures. Will you let them stop you, or will you let them teach you? Will you let them define you, or will you let them refine you? Will you let them mark the end of your journey, or will you let them light the way to your next beginning? The power to transform failure into success isn't something you need to acquire. It's something you already have. You just need to recognize it, embrace it, and use it. Every failure you've experienced has been preparing you for this moment. Every setback has been teaching you what you need to know. Every disappointment has been strengthening you for what's to come. Your next failure isn't your enemy, it's your ally. It's not an obstacle, it's an opportunity. It's not the end of your story, it's the beginning of your comeback. And that comeback starts now, today, in this moment, with your decision to see failure not as something that happens to you, but as something that happens for you. The world is waiting for what you'll create, what you'll discover, what you'll achieve. And yes, you'll fail along the way, but those failures are just the first drafts of your success story. They're just the warm-up for your greatest achievements. They're just the beginning of your finest hour. So, fail forward. Fail better. Fail in the service of something bigger than yourself. And watch as those failures transform into the foundation of your greatest success.